Welcome back, everybody. We are going to hop right into it today and pick up where we left off with Goebbels' Principles of Propaganda. Like I said last time, Goebbels' Principles of Propaganda have gone on to set the foundation for pretty much all, well, at least government propaganda ever since. Goebbels truly was a master of his craft. So let's hop right into it. We are on principle number 8. The purpose, content, and effectiveness of enemy propaganda, the strength and effects of an expose, and the nature of current propaganda campaigns determine whether enemy propaganda should be ignored or refuted. Most of the time, Goebbels seemed mortally afraid of enemy propaganda. Even though he had controlled all the mass media in Germany since 1933, he must have been convinced that Germans had not been completely converted to the Nazi cause, or at least that they might be corrupted by enemy efforts. He admitted in January of 1942 that foreign broadcasts are again being listened to more extensively, even though death could be the penalty for doing so. That's a little extreme, huh? 14 months later, he noted with dismay that the English and Americans have greatly expanded their radio broadcasts to the Axis countries and intend to step them up even more. And that is absolutely true. What he's referring to there are organizations like Radio Free Europe that popped up during the war. Radio Free Europe is still around to this very day, and it was an OSS creation at the time. And one of the key people who helped set up Radio Free Europe was a guy named Dimitri de Mohrenschildt. Now, that name seems familiar to you. It should. Dimitri de Mohrenschildt was the brother of George de Mohrenschildt, who was Oswald's handler in Dallas. But we will get to that on another episode. Goebbels' first impulse was to reply to enemy propaganda. He wrote as though he were a member of a great international debating society, and as if silence on his part would mean the loss of the argument and of his own prestige. Actually, however, he judiciously balanced a number of factors before he decided to ignore or refute enemy claims. In the first place, he analyzed enemy propaganda. If it seemed that the goal of the propaganda was to elicit a reply, he was silent. The English, he stated on February 6, 1942, are now employing a new mode of propaganda. They commit General Rommel to objectives which at the moment he certainly cannot have, in order to be able to declare perhaps in 8 or 14 days that he has not reached these goals. A direct reply would have been the equivalent to selling the German army short. His practice was to expose such traps to his subordinates and then to have them maintain silence in the mass media. On the other hand, a reply was made if it were felt that the enemy was transmitting blatant falsehoods. Since almost any enemy statement was considered false, Goebbels believed that only the blatant ones should be exposed. In this category, he included claims that Germans had bombed Vatican City, that there had been disturbances in Berlin, and Stalin was adopting a more lenient policy towards religion. Ineffective enemy claims required no reply, since a refutation would either give them more currency or else be a waste of propaganda energy. Enemy propaganda was very frequently branded as being ineffective, judgments which appear to have been either intuitive or rationalizations of an inability to reply. Effective enemy propaganda, however, demanded immediate action. The enemy, for example, was seldom permitted to acquire prestige. Thus, Goebbels attacked British boasting concerns concerning a parachute landing at Le Havre, a raid on Saint Nazaire, and the occupation of Madagascar. Sometimes it appeared as though he instituted counter-proceedings not because the enemy was being successful, but simply because he was able to do so. When the enemy was thought to be employing horoscopes and other occult propaganda against Germany, a reply in kind was immediately prepared. If the enemy seemed to be scoring an especially important propaganda triumph in its war of nerves, specifically at the beginning of the heavy British raids on German cities after the downfall of Mussolini, or in the midst of strong pressure on Turkey by Britain in the late fall of 1943. The only really adequate reply was considered to be a speech by Hitler himself. Then secondly, Goebbels examined his own propaganda arsenal before he essayed a reply. He kept silent if he believed that his case in the absence of facts or arguments would appear too weak. He was also too afraid of the German National Committee, which the Russians formed in Moscow, that he carried on no counter-propaganda against this group. Sometimes an enemy claim was disregarded as a counterclaim advance. As Germany was attacked for her treatment of Jews, the policy of, quote, complete silence seemed unwise. It is best to seize the offensive and to say something about English cruelty in India or the Near East, and also to intensify our anti-Bolshevik propaganda. So whenever Goebbels was challenged with something that was coming out that was actually true in Germany, he would feel like he had to reply to it, which is, I think that's just common sense. All right, let's move on to the next section, number 9. Credibility, intelligence, and the possible effects of communicating determine whether propaganda materials should be censored. Goebbels had no scruples whatsoever concerning the use of censorship. News policy, he stated, is a weapon of war. Its purpose is to wage war, not to give out information. His decision rested upon 3 pragmatic considerations. Now, let me comment on that really quickly. Goebbels knew better than anybody that the function of news was not to give out information. And he said it was a weapon of war, and its purpose was to wage war. Because you have to think, you people sitting at home are not the only people watching the news. World leaders and governments look to the media to see the sentiment within a nation. And Goebbels was wise enough to understand that. Goebbels recognized first that often credibility might be impaired